Hey guys, Saga here, and in today's video I want to talk to you about this clip.
I am ready. Triple kill. My true potential is unleashed.
But more specifically, I want to talk to you about this moment right here. Now the reason that this moment is so important is because there's a lot of decision making that goes behind going in here and blade dashing in. And I think that that decision making, in a way, is reflective of all the decision making that Genji needs to know how to make. You've just killed the McCree. You've also softened up the Lucio and the Bastion. And here you have to ask yourself, do you go in? This is important because of the nature of Overwatch, especially on attack and defense maps, where trading 1-for-1 is not sufficient, because if you trade 1-for-1 as a defender, you have just lost. Or rather, you've lost that trade. And the reason you've lost that trade is because the defender's run back is much longer than the offense run back. So that most of the time you trade 1-for-1, it is not worth it. So you need to aim to get better value as a defender, which means you have to stay alive to do so. Now, I'm going to give you multiple answers for this. In a situation where your teams are even, meaning that you have relatively the same amount of people alive, and, no one's crippled, no one's lost all their healers or lost their tanks, or, it's just a relatively even fight. I say don't go in, because the likelihood that you die before getting the value you need is decently high. So let's look at the information you know. So from going into the first time, you know that they had a McCree, he's dead now. They have a Lucio and a Bastion and a Reinhardt. And the key here is they have a healer, right? And that healer is Lucio. So you know everybody who's within his proximity is getting healed. So any of that softening damage you did, where I'm sure they still have a bit of the damage on it, some of it has been healed. So by making the decision to blade dash in, you're not necessarily likely to get that next reset. Now, if you were likely to get the reset, if somebody was at critically low health, blade dash in immediately. Get that reset, blade dash back out. You might be able to wipe them all. And I mean, that's really the goal with going in there, right? Now let's look at another case. Let's say that your team has been losing the fight. You know that you just lost 3 or 4 critical members of your team, and that in this moment, they're really bunched up, and Genji's good at burst damage, and you just got that first kill, you soften them up a bit. I think at this point you take the risk, because there's a risk versus reward ratio that's in your favor. Your team has probably lost a sustainable team fight. You've probably lost the point, unless you pull off some kind of crazy combo. So at this point where you're losing terribly, yes, go for it. Worst case scenario here is that you die. And if you die in a scenario where the rest of your team is dead, that's kind of a good thing. You get to regroup and come back for the push next time. Maybe you can take it back. The only time where that's not a good thing is when you're dying really out of sync with your team. So like say 5 members of your team wipe out, but for some reason you're still around. Like don't rush in to a fight that you're just not going to win because you're like, oh, maybe I could kill them all. Unless you have a reasonable expectation. I mean, in this case, they're all bunched up in a hallway, so So in summation, as an attacker in this situation, your life is worth less and you can go for broke more easily, but you still want to preserve your life. Staying alive as Genji is probably the single most important thing you can do. So you need to have a reasonable expectation of value. As a defender, you want to play as conservatively as possible because your life is worth more. And if you are in a position where your defense is already broken and you have a possibility to kill them, and at the worst case scenario you'll simply die and then rejoin your team to group up and push again, then also go for it. But if not, play conservative. The best piece of advice I ever got about Genji was to stay alive, and that was from Siegel. Play conservative, stay alive. Genji appreciates in value and does, better things the longer he's alive. And I know that seems obvious, but sometimes it isn't so obvious when the bloodlust takes you. And small decisions like going and overextending can cost your team the game, can cost you time, can make your life all kinds of harder. Overwatch is a game where your small decisions have large echoing effects, so be smart, play conservative, unless the risk outweighs the reward. So don't be a hero.
Unless